Titans, we are back with a brand new build. Today, we are going to be pairing Abeyant Leap on Prismatic Titan, and we're going to be using the exotic sword Ergo Sum. Just watch how fast I get Prismatic, and pay attention to the insane amount of buffs stacking on the left side of my screen. Note that there are no positive modifiers helping me out. It takes me just 19 seconds to get Prismatic, and in that time I gained Woven Mail, Frost Armor, Void Overshield, and Amplified. And just a second later, I already have my super in only 20 seconds. With this build, we can stack nearly every major damage resistance source in the game, spam both Prismatic and our super, and have constant access to healing. So let's break down exactly how this build works, starting with Abeyant Leap. Its description, Puppeteer's Control reads, improves Dranger's Lash and spawns additional projectiles. These projectiles track targets more aggressively, travel farther, and suspend stronger. Gain Woven Mail when you suspend a target. So without this exotic, Dranger's Lash doesn't do a lot for us, but when combined with Abeyant Leap, we get 3 suspending projectiles out of our barricade. They travel an extra 5 meters, and they suspend for a lot longer. On top of that, we get 10 seconds of Woven Mail for suspending any target with any source of suspend. Suspend is already really strong since you stop enemies from being able to damage you, but in the case you don't suspend everything, you get Woven Mail, which is by far the most consistent DR source in the game right now. Almost all builds that use Abeyant Leap revolve around Strand, but if we use this exotic on Prismatic, we can have a near permanent uptime on Woven Mail while having access to other subclass verbs like Jolt, Amplified, Frost Armor, Void Overshield, and even Devour. Now, when it comes to our Prismatic subclass, there's a few things we need to make sure to have. Our super should be Behemoth for 3 reasons. First being that without Behemoth, chunkier boss targets can take a while to kill. Our neutral game is going to be really strong, however, we do lack a bit of burst damage. Behemoth is incredibly strong on bosses, especially if you manage to position the crystals correctly. Standing anywhere around 5 to 10 meters away from the boss should make most of your crystals hit. The second reason we want to use Behemoth is for Darkness Prismatic energy. This build revolves around looping your Prismatic and super. We will always have our light meter filled because of Ergo Sum, but if we need Darkness energy, Behemoth will be guaranteed to fill our Darkness meter. After that super, we can pop Prismatic and we should be able to get another super and repeat that loop. Finally, the third reason is to get Frost Armor on orb pickups with Faceted Purpose for more DR stacking. Next up for our class ability, we are going to use Rally Barricade. It pairs best with Dranger's Lash, and on top of that, if we stand behind the barricade, we get 80% DR from splash damage, and we draw aggro through the barricade. Then for our melee, we want to use Shield Throw. Shield Throw hits give us a Void Overshield for 10 seconds. That Void Overshield is what's going to give us access to Weaken and Devour with the artifact. Finally, for our grenade, Shackle Grenade just gives us another source of suspend. So we have 3 sources of suspend on this build. Our grenade, our class ability, and most importantly, our Prismatic Grenade. Titan Prismatic Grenade has usually been pretty underwhelming, but now that suspend gives us Woven Mail, it's incredibly useful. Because of our high uptime on Prismatic, this should mean that we can always suspend a target and therefore always have Woven Mail. Now for our aspects, we should use Knockout with Dranger's Lash. Knockout isn't really going to be doing much for us while we're holding Ergo Sum, but in the cases that we aren't, it gives access to an emergency heal and amplified on melee kill. The other Titan aspects don't really do a whole lot for us on this build. Dranger's Lash, however, is pretty important for our early neutral game. It gives our barricade the ability to suspend targets in the first place, and it is required for the first half of Abeyant Leap to work. Finally, for our fragments, we are going to use Facet of Awakening, Facet of Hope, Facet of Protection, Facet of Ruin, and Facet of Purpose. Facet of Awakening makes it so that rapidly defeating targets with light or darkness damage generates an elemental pickup of the damage type used. We should mostly see ionic traces or tangles. On top of that, we get 10 health stat. With Facet of Hope, our class ability recharges significantly faster, giving us more access to suspend with our barricade. Then Facet of Protection gives us 15% DR when surrounded by 3 or more targets. Facet of Ruin gives our Behemoth super a little bump in shatter damage, and it gives us plus 10 weapon stat. And finally, with Facet of Purpose, our orb pickups are going to give us Frost Armor when we use a Stasis super. Now with our subclass covered, let's take a look at our weapons. For our exotic energy weapon, we are going to use Ergo Sum. In particular, we are going to use a caster frame Arc Conductor sword. With an Arc Conductor Ergo Sum, when we use our heavy attack, we get 50% arc damage resist, and we spread lightning to targets. What's exciting about this though is that the lightning we spread to targets actually counts as sword damage. This means that because we have shield throw on, we can get a void buff, and then because of Singularity Blade, our arc conductor can spread weaken to other targets. Killing those weakened targets should get us Devour. Now it is important to note that if you one-shot the ad, it doesn't officially weaken the target, so you do have to keep that in mind, but it should be pretty easy to get Devour. Once you have Devour though, you are effectively immortal. On top of that, we have our Catalyst, where dealing damage with a prismatic grenade gives us Ergo Sum ammo. Once we get prismatic, we should be able to make a ton of ammo. Per grenade, we get around 9 to 12 sword ammo, and we should be able to throw multiple grenades per prismatic. Also, Ergo Sum generates both light and darkness energy on final blows, so that means we can use Ergo Sum for getting prismatic and all of our ad clear needs. Then our kinetic and heavy slot can exist pretty much just for champion stuns and boss damage. Now when it comes to the kinetic slot, I mostly alternated between a sniper for barrier and mint retrograde for overload stunning. I also tried to slot an opening salvo mod here for unstoppable stuns in case I had no sources of suspend. Then for my heavy, I alternated between either a cluster bomb rocket or the new kinetic heavy sniper. If you aren't interested in using Ergo Sum, you could probably swap to the Praxic Blade. However, for the sake of variety, I chose not to use the lightsaber. Next up, we are going to take a more in-depth look at our artifact. As I mentioned before, we want to have Singularity Blade so that we can weaken targets with Arc Conductor and our melees. Then because we are weakening targets, we can get Devour by using Power from Pain. All we need to do is rapidly defeat those weakened targets. Wood Infestation will let us spread weaken by defeating weakened targets, completing the loop so that we can reliably get Devour on this build. The idea here is we throw our Void shield throw, we get that Void overshield, and hopefully we can weaken enough targets to get Devour before we lose our Void overshield. Some other important artifact perks are Dielectric. When we defeat arc debuff targets, like the targets jolted by a prismatic grenade, we can generate bolt charge, heal, and generate orbs. Finally, using Repost, we can get unstoppable stuns with our swords, and with counter energy, we can get some ability energy back on champion stuns. As always, I will leave a screenshot here of my artifact in case you wanted to copy it for yourself. Now as far as our armor mods go, on our helmet we are going to use an arc siphon mod to create orbs on rapid kills with arc weapons. Then we are going to use a super font mod for extra damage with our behemoth super. And finally, a dynamo mod to get extra super energy on class ability usage. Now for our gauntlets, we are going to use 2 grenade fonts so that we can guaranteed have 100 grenade stat. That'll make sure that we have the best uptime possible for our shackle grenade. Then a bolster detonation mod will give us class ability when we cause damage with our grenades. For our chest piece, we really just want to match resist to the activity. You do get arc resist with arc conductor active, but I wouldn't 100% rely on that, as if you swap off of Ergo Sum, you will immediately lose that DR. For our boots, I used a weapon font to boost my weapon stat to 200. This guaranteed I would have the highest possible boss damage, and I would always get enhanced ammo bricks. Then I used a scavenger mod to make my ammo economy even better. Finally, I used a better already mod to give myself health regeneration and orb pickup. After the nerfs to recuperation, better already is just much more impactful. Finally, for our class item, we are going to use a class font to boost our class stat as close to 100 as possible. A Reaper mod will let us create an orb after using our class ability and getting a kill. Then a powerful attraction mod will let us collect orbs around us when we use our class abilities. Now for our armor sets, we pretty much just want to use Smoke Jumper 2-piece and Ferropotent 2-piece, but there is definitely some room for flexibility. Smoke Jumper 2-piece gives us 3 seconds of DR when we pick up an orb of power. We create a ton of orbs with this build, so we can stack more DR on top of Woven Mail, Frost Armor, and Amplified. Then Ferropotent 2-piece makes it so that regaining any amount of our shields grants us 10% DR. Orb pickups will proc this, meaning it is a very versatile armor set. Using this build with Sage Protector is an option if you want to build a little more into having your grenade and class ability. However, I don't really recommend this one since you should be in prismatic really often. Finally, 2-piece Swordmaster has the potential to be strong. Sword hits exhaust targets, making them do 25% less damage. I wasn't able to test it, but Arc Conductor should count towards this. Finally, all we got left to look at is our stat distributions. Our main goal here is to have high uptime on our abilities and weapons. For our weapon stat, we ideally want to have 180 so that when we get armor charge, the weapon font should boost us to 200. Class stat should be at 80 or lower since we have one class font mod. Super stat should be exactly 100 so that we have the best possible cooldown time, and so that we get bonus super damage from having a super font mod. Having 60 grenade stat with 2 grenade fonts should give us the best cooldown on our grenade. Finally, we have melee and health. I found melee stat was not that important. We have Transcendence, so we already have decent uptime on melees. So having some health stat really just makes it that if we don't have Devour, we can rely on orb pickups for health regeneration and DR. I mentioned this earlier, but Devour activation can be unreliable if everything gets one-shot by our Conductor, so I had health stat as a failsafe. I'm going to leave a screenshot here showing off all my individual armor pieces and their stat rolls in case you want to see how to get these stats. With that, we've covered everything you need to know about this build. I got a few quick tips for this build. First, I want to emphasize that getting Devour is not 100% reliable. Shield Throw could only bounce on one target and you could immediately lose that Void Overshield, or our Conductor could one-shot everything before weaken can be applied. Finally, the moment you get Prismatic or your super, just use it. The uptime on these two are really high, so it's never really a waste. That's about it for tips though. We pretty much just get to spam Suspend, we get to have incredibly high DR and good healing. As always, the build link is going to be in the description in case you guys want it. Anyways, if you did enjoy the video and want to see more videos in the future, subscribe. We're closing in on 1,000 subscribers and it would be awesome to reach that before the end of February. Thanks for watching and I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao!